Hey everybody, Dr. Rob Silverman here. I'm with my esteemed colleague, medical doctor, Dr. Todd Lee. I'm really excited to have you on because I know this
Really?
is going to be no holds barred, man. You're going to let it go.
Yeah, I don't have a filter. I mean, I do have a filter. People don't believe that I've got a filter. My filter is kind of like that mosquito net that's like 30 years old. So there's huge holes through it. So definitely you're getting all types of things through the filter. There is a filter. That's what people can't believe. Is like, wait a minute, you had a filter this whole time. Why weren't you using it? I'm like, I was. It's just not a very good filter.
You can always change the filter and update.
You know what? They keep telling me that, but I haven't found it at Home Depot or at Walmart is mouth filters.
Well, you're a medical doctor and you specialize in people and men, especially in ages 40 to 60, as I understand, who want to bodybuild. So you have your own little interesting lens on what you would want to do and how people can achieve longevity. As we all know, longevity is interesting, but the key to longevity, we both agree, is muscle mass. Nobody's better than you at helping people put on muscle mass. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background in addition to just being a medical doctor?
Okay, so wow, my background. So I grew up um relatively small compared to other kids. And I was grew up and my mom thought I had a big mouth, like a big mouth. And she was like, you're going to get your ass beat a lot growing up. So I got put into judo at like 5 years old. And
Mhm.
so, I got kicked out of judo for being too aggressive and then was in karate by 7. And then I did martial arts pretty consistently. I saw my friend's uncle once who was a bodybuilder and they told me he was Mr. Michigan. I'm from Michigan. It turns out he was not Mr. Michigan. He had gotten third in the middleweights, but generally speaking, people don't really process that type of information. They just think if you're in the show, that's what you are. So, nonetheless, I've never seen anything like it. It was like a He-Man action figure in real life. And I was like, I want to be that. I want to be Mr. Michigan. So I stopped playing with the other kids on the playground and I started doing push-ups and sit-ups is and I mean I'm sorry, I said sit-ups. We didn't know about crunches back then. And I did pull-ups, underhand for the bicep and overhand for the back. And I basically was training at like 8, 9, 10, 11 before I was allowed to start lifting weights at 12. And I was still involved in martial arts the whole time. And then I got a personal trainer. And what was cool was Jack Kevorkian went to my gym. So I got to see him pull up in this red Corvette ZR1 or whatever. And I was just like, I remember once I was bagging groceries at and when I was 15, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I was bagging groceries at my first job at Meyer Thrifty Acre. It's kind of like a Walmart in Michigan. And I was just like, I love your work, sir. And then I started shaking his hand. It made everyone so uncomfortable. I fucking loved it. It was the best. I was like, people were so offended that I was shaking Jack Kevorkian's hand and praising him. I was like, you do you, but we didn't have that phrase back then. But that's basically what I was saying. So I jumping back earlier. So I started with a personal trainer at 12 and I did took lifting pretty seriously. At least I thought I did. I also left out that I switched from whole milk to skim milk when I was 8 because I didn't want the added fat. And then by 12, I was reading every nutritional label. And I basically had a system where I wouldn't eat anything that had more than 5 grams of fat per serving. Now, of course, this is a terrible system because I could have more than one serving. I'm not accounting for sugar. My mom's like, sugar is going to make you more fat than having fat in your food, Todd. It doesn't matter. And I just ignored her. I'm like, what does she know? She's my mom. And and so I basically did that for a while, the lifting and the martial arts concurrently until I got through college. I went to undergrad. I got a degree in biochemistry and psychology. And then I got into grad school because I didn't get into med school. I had placed really, really high on the MCAT which is the test to get into medical school. And so the guidance counselor was like, there's never, none of the schools around here have seen scores like that. You can go anywhere you want. And Michigan is kind of special in that it has a lot of really good schools. So usually if you grow up in Michigan, because Michigan schools are cheaper if you're a resident, and they're some of the best schools in the world, you would never leave. So I went from U of M to Wayne State for master's program. And then while I was in the master's program, they extended me an opportunity to go to Ross, whereas I would have to wait another year and a half to get into Wayne State Medical School because of the way that they only have September admissions, and I would have to complete my master's and all this other stuff. I had 90% of my coursework and my master's done, and they took me into Ross, and I was able to get done in medical school like 2 years earlier at Ross than I would have if I stayed in Michigan for my medical degree from Wayne State. And I left this out. The reason why I didn't get into medical school despite having really high test scores is I only applied to one school and I didn't fill out the essay. Like I just didn't do it. I was like, I've got the highest scores I've ever seen. I don't need to fill this out. So what they said is, when someone has test scores like yours and grades as bad as yours, they're lazy. And even if you're gifted, we don't want lazy people. So you have to do this program and prove to us you're not lazy. And everyone's like, no, they're just trying to gouge you for an extra 20 grand. And I was like, yeah, that's probably what they're trying to do, but I don't have a choice. I'm in that boat now. So I put away lifting for medical school, got pretty fat, didn't like it, went on a diet without really lifting that much and shredded off all the fat pretty quick. But then when I went back to lift again, now that I've been through school for like several years, I was like, instead of doing what everyone does, which is total body 3 times a week, 3 sets of 10, I'm going to get Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding. And so I picked up Arnold's book and I found out I'd been doing everything wrong my whole life. It turns out most of the information in Arnold's book is also wrong. And the total body 3 times a week, 3 sets of 10 is actually better for most people to build muscle. Very few people would ever need the volume that Arnold needed, but it got me in love with the sport of bodybuilding. And so I pretty much changed gears and I switched from, I mean, I'd already been in practice at this point for a year, but I switched from focusing on medicine to bodybuilding. And within no time, I was basically coaching girls for bikini competitions, because right at this time is when the bikini sport started. Before this, female bodybuilders weren't what female bodybuilders were like male bodybuilders with a bikini top, not just a bikini bottom. But bikini, the actual division, was more like a beach body, more of what traditional men would find to be ideal physical look. So what's funny is there's a huge market for it because no one was coaching these girls. So everyone who makes money off of their looks, whether it's models, strippers, waitresses, all of them want to do bikini because, and so that became an incredibly good business, is preparing girls for bikini competitions. And because most of them had the money and they pay in cash. So I don't have to complete that thought. And then from there, after the bikini market got saturated in about 3 years with a bunch of other guys doing bikini competitions, I ended up getting a job offering at a supplement company that I was sponsored at because I was a competitive bodybuilder. I left that out. I had done powerlifting for a little bit, then I did competitive bodybuilding. I was doing pretty good. And I won my first show, and then I went on to the North American Championship, and I got 4th at my second show. And then I won the state championship my 3rd show. And this is in my weight class. I want to clarify that. And then I got this job doing basically designing supplements for this company. Is I had a website, and then on that website, I would write articles about all types of different subjects. And then I would also design products, and the website would sell those products. And I got all the money up front to do everything, and I got a paycheck to do it. So I didn't see any of the profits. I was an employee, but I had almost no oversight. I could do whatever I wanted. And so I ran that supplement company for a while. And then for an ethical disagreement between me and the owner, I left and I started my own supplement company. And I had that for about 8 years. And then just recently after COVID pretty much wiped out everyone's businesses that were private practice and non-essential. So if you close all the gyms, the supplement industry becomes a lot dicier. It's harder to do online coaching for people. Bodybuilding became more difficult. Everything became difficult with the gyms closed. Nothing could be worse for people's health than having no access to exercise. And then we saw the consequences of that as everyone's locked in their house for 2 years or whatever. Everyone gained weight, everyone drank a lot of alcohol. It really had a catastrophic effect on the nation's health and emotional well-being and alcoholism. But we can't get into that because we might get banned. But what I did notice was, hey, all the businesses died. So I had 3 businesses, now I have nothing. So I ended up getting an opportunity to start working in the HRT clinic again. And then later this year, I really, me and Dr. Karina Dodson paired up actually last year, but it didn't really take off until this year. That now that I'm practicing through an HRT clinic, our new coaching business is doing great. So I kind of have an integrated approach towards caring for patients where we handle their nutrition and their training and their medicine. So whereas a normal bodybuilding coach just does nutrition and training programming, and a normal doctor just handles someone's medicine and blood work, that we handle everything: the blood work, the training programming, the nutrition, using the food to treat chronic illnesses such as yourself, how you do things. And then also, of course, if it's necessary, there's always prescription medications where food fails. Although at this point in almost nobody food fails. People come to me, they got 4 or 5 medications. They're not going to need those medications most of the time for very long. Certainly not all of them, and certainly not at those doses. And that although I do specialize in guys who are over 40, who are previously or currently competitive bodybuilders, I would say 90% of my people are not bodybuilders. And I would say about 40% of my people are women. And probably 40% of the people are also under 40. So we get all types of people over 60, people under 40, people who are competitive bodybuilders, women, that we're very comfortable with all demographics. It's just that I feel that, yes, someone between 40 and 50 who's a competitive bodybuilder, and I would probably be one of the best bets, certainly best bet for the money as far as a medicine coach goes.
So you're a medical doctor. You didn't finish your master's. It's okay.
Yeah.
You're a pro bodybuilder though.
Yeah, I won my first pro qualifier in 2012, but at the time they didn't give out pro cards to my weight class. So I ended up winning the state championship, I think 5 more times. And then once I finally won the overall at the state championship, I was forbidden from competing in the state or any state level show pretty much again, unless it's to requalify. So I had no choice but to go back and do national shows. And I won 4 more times in 4 different weight classes, basically age and weight class specific, before I actually got my pro card. So it's like I ended up winning 8 state level championships and 5 national level championships before I finally got my pro card, which is pretty weird. Most people, like, if you'll talk to girls who are doing bikini, they'll say, oh, it took me so long to get my pro card. I got my pro card, it took 2 years. It's like it took 2 years for the average bikini girl to get her pro card, whereas it took me 12 years. Now, to put in perspective, 90% of people who compete don't make it to a national stage, and 90% of people who compete nationally don't get a pro card. So
no, it's very hard. It's very selective. So medical doctor, pro bodybuilder. I've lifted weights, doesn't look like you, and that's good. It's okay. I can live with it. You know, the shrink will be getting the call when we hang out a little later. Bottom line, there's a lot of conversation about bodybuilding. There's 2 camps. Now you mentioned Arnold. Arnold was a volume guy.
Right.
Then we've got this guy called Mike Menser, who's become very popular again. He's passed away many years ago, and he was a high intense guy. So Arnold would do 30 sets for like deltoids of biceps. You know, biceps are not a big muscle. And Mensa would do 1 set and 1 set to failure. Who's right?
So the scientific research shows for hypertrophy, for growing of tissue, it's the volume of sets that matter, not the intensity so much. The caveat is the sets need to be intense. They need to be close to failure, but they don't need to be to absolute failure. So Mike Menzer took an idea presented by Arthur Jones. Arthur Jones invented the Nautilus equipment. And I have a friend who's in the inside. He used to work for Arthur Jones at a Nautilus gym. And none of the people who worked there used Arthur Jones's system. That Arthur Jones's system was basically BS used to sell people on the idea of circuit training with his equipment. So people would join his gym and use his equipment. Mike Menzer did not get big using the Arthur Jones system. After he retired from competitive bodybuilding, he then started working with Arthur Jones and was the celebrity spokesperson for Jones's material and was paid to do so. So that's the now, but so that's this. Now that doesn't mean that Dorian Yates didn't take Menzer's ideas and integrate them into his own, and then he says he got better results. And then from there we have DC training from Dante. And right now the big person carrying the torch is someone named Paul Carter. And the big gist of this is that taking a set beyond failure, taking it to failure, and then doing partial reps beyond failure is supposed to induce the greatest stimulus for hypertrophy. The problem is, although that's true for a one individual set, one set taken beyond failure is better than one set to failure, is better than one set with reps in reserve. In other words, short of failure. That is so fatiguing that the amount of total volume you get per week will be less. And since the body hypertrophy responds to total volume more than intensity, doing 5 sets of 8 when you could do 10 is going to have more effective reps and more stimulus for growth than doing 1 set to 12 when you could only do 10. In other words, if you could do 10 perfect reps, and then your buddy grabs the bar and helps you get 2 more, that would be 2 reps beyond failure, right? So that'd be 10 plus 2. That's not really 12 reps. That's going to be more stimulus than 10 plus 1 or 10 or 9 or 8 or 7 or 6. But if you do 5 sets of 8 reps, it's not exactly 40 effective reps, but it's still more than if you did 12. There's this model designed by Chris Beardsley called the effective reps model, where the last 5 reps of every set are the effective reps, and you add up the effective reps, and that's a good proxy for determining the hypertrophic stimulus of a given exercise. So in this example, doing 1 set of 10 plus 2 reps beyond failure would be 7 effective reps. But if you did 5 sets of 8 with 2 reps in the tank, 2 reps in reserve, that's 3 effective reps each set for a total of 15 effective reps. So that 5 sets of 8 is twice as effective as 1 set of 10 plus 2. Now, the other difference is that you will build more strength with your high intensity set. Now, strength's actually a liability in some respects, because the more strong you are, the more weight you have to use. And and basically the more weight you use, the more fatiguing the set is, irregardless of your strength or volume. So 1 set of 10 with 500 pounds for squats is just as fatiguing for a 250-pound man as it would be for a 350-pound man. You still are accumulating the same amount of central nervous system fatigue from moving 500 pounds 10 times. So a guy who's less strong, who can only squat 300 pounds for 10 reps, he will get just as many effective reps, but he'll get 60% of the accumulated fatigue. Now, this is assuming it's all linear. It's probably not exactly linear, but it's basically the closest we can approximate is to use these numbers. So the summation is, and the other factor is, especially for people over 40, not taking the set to failure is safer. So as you approach failure, you get less neuromuscular control. As it's like the same weight could feel light the first rep, but it's grueling the 10th rep. And eventually this elbow is going to flare out because your rhomboid on the left side isn't as strong. So you're going to start using your trap. And then this is going to compromise your rotator cuff. And the supraspinatus tendon is going to get pinched by the acromion, especially if it's a calcified acromion. So that's going to tear that muscle tendon, and that's going to cause injury. And had you stopped at 8 reps, you would never have started to wear on that acromion, that supraspinatus tendon. But once you start going beyond 2 reps in reserve to 1 rep in reserve, 0 reps in reserve, or heaven forbid, you're doing sets beyond failure and someone's helping you, then you could be doing this shit and you're tearing all your tendons to pieces over time. One time, you probably won't tear anything, but after 6 months, 8 months, you're going to get accumulated inflammation of the elbow, of the shoulder. So a lot of times, if your hands are stacked over your elbow, you're good. If you come inside your elbow with your hands and your elbow's tucked, you're good. If it flares a little bit, you're going to start feeling some pain on this tricep tendon over time. It's not immediate. So you don't get that immediate negative feedback not to do that. Now, the same thing goes if you go wider. If your hands go wider than your elbows, you're going to feel it in your shoulder more. That's why a lot of guys like me, we never bench press. Is because it's just too much danger and too much risk. It's the most technical lift. It's actually more technical than the squat. So the powerlifting lifts of bench, squat, deadlift are things most bodybuilders would never do because of the sheer amount of volume we have to do. We are much more likely to get accumulative injuries over time than a power lifter. Even though they're using more weight, they're doing way less volume than we do, so that we have so many repeated bouts of tendon injury to a maladaptive pattern or to an exercise that isn't optimal for our physiology. So to answer your question completely, when you weigh all of the aggregate, it would take an aggregate of all of the factors, that strength is more of a liability. So intensity's advantage is a disadvantage, that fatigue is a huge problem that people don't account for. So taking intensity as a liability, that as things get more intense, they become more injurious. That makes it a liability. And that the only thing that really grows you is volume. And so high volume training with lighter weight, or at least with more reps in reserve, is going to be more beneficial for hypertrophy. Every factor indicates that reps in reserve is an optimal way of training. And the optimal amount of reps in reserve seems to be between 1 and 3. Whereas you can periodize this, where week 1, you do 3 reps in reserve, week 2, you do 2 reps in reserve, week 3, you do 1 rep in reserve, and then week 4, you go to failure. So without increasing the load, you simply would do 7 reps, 8 reps, 9 reps, and 10 reps. Every week you add 1 rep to a load that you know you're going submaximal. You're not giving it everything you got. You're stopping short. You're not redlining it. You're orange lining it. So you feel like a sissy. But the bottom line is it's still going to accumulate more total hypertrophy signal with less fatigue, so that you can do 4 weeks in a row without actually having to take a deload.
Well, let's unpack that. There's a lot of really good information. So
Right.
if I go to the gym and I'm trying to get some muscle hypertrophy, I want to put on 10, 15 pounds of muscle. I want to start to look like I lift weights, as opposed to, I'm 185 now. I want to get to 200, and I want to start having people notice that I'm going to the gym per se. You would say 3 sets of 10 for like a shoulder press, but I could have done 11 and 12 reps as opposed to just the 10. So you wouldn't go to fatigue. That's correct.
The terms fatigued and failure, they're kind of vague because people have different interpretations. But what they did do is they found that if the velocity of the concentric phase decreases dramatically, you're between 2 and 1 RIR. So what I tell people for a subjective way to measure how close to failure you are is if the velocity of your concentric phase decreases dramatically, then abort the set after that rep. Don't see if you can get more. So if this is the tempo, okay, let me do proper tempo.
So you're controlling it
And always
and
come
then you're
dead stop,
exploding up.
stretch it, explode up, and then I come down and I'm done. That's reps in reserve 2 or 1. So we're getting the best ratio of stimulus to fatigue at reps negative 2 reps in reserve or 1 rep in reserve.
So it's appropriate time under tension, volume, but not necessarily going to proverbial fatigue as we know it.
Right. Arnold's term was going to fatigue. They changed it to going to failure, I think about 10 or 15 years after his time. But yeah, for people who are more familiar with the 70s and 80s style bodybuilding, the term going to fatigue is now called going to failure. Because what they're talking about is they're talking about positive concentric failure, because your concentric phase will be, you'll lose motor control, usually, especially for beginners. Only like super advanced lifters will be able to have complete and total motor control at absolute failure. Most people will be like this once they start getting close to failure. And once your arm starts doing this, the chance of injury is so high that the risk of injury so exceeds the tiny amount of stimulus you're going to get out of it. There's no actual advantage.
So
But yes, as you start to approach fatigue, and then once once you see that velocity change from explosion to slow, we're at about 3 RAR, to a grinder, we're about 1 RAR.
now, do you think people who will adhere to that high intense training like a Mensa or an Arthur Jones, a Dorian Yates, do you think part of the reason that it's not as effective as the volume is because you're elevating so much inflammation, you're tearing the muscle down so much, you're going to the outer limits of injury, if you will?
So John Meadows, who's no longer with us, had this great expression. Don't dig yourself so deep of a hole you can't climb out. This is very similar to what Arnold used to say, which is we don't want to dig a giant hole that we have to spend 3 days filling back in. We want to break the surface and then let the scab form. And then now we can stand on that scab and we're taller. So the idea is to do enough trauma to stimulate the hypertrophic effect, but not so much trauma that so much resources, calories, and time goes into repairing us to get us back to baseline before super compensation begins. Because ideally, if you're trying to get as much volume as possible, it isn't just volume in one exposure, but it's frequent exposure. If muscle only grows for 72 hours, you never want to take more than a 100-hour break between hitting a given muscle. So the traditional way, the Mensa way of training a muscle for one set every 2 weeks is not going to be as effective as Arnold's way of training a muscle 3 times a week with super high volume, because he could recover from 3 times a week training. Most people need 3 days to recover. Very few people can recover in 2 days.
So
Like certain body parts, the smaller the body part, the quicker it tends to recover. Biceps recover very quick. Delts recover very quick. Hamstrings recover very slow. Lower back recovers very slow. Lower back takes 100 hours to recover. So if people don't program their squats and their deadlifts at least 4 days apart, they're always going to have lower back soreness.
Whoa. Squats and deadlifts. You're talking, let's define it. Is it a back squat with a barbell? Is it a front squat? Is it a belt squat? Okay.
It's a category. It's just
Now,
like, if it's like we say insects, it's like there's back squats, there's front squats, there's safety squats, there's heel elevated squats, there's glute dominant squats, quad dominant squats, hack squats, belt squats, pendulum squats. And every person's going to have a different rank order of what gives them the best stimulus to fatigue in the given muscle they're trying to train. So for a lady who's trying to grow her glutes, barbell back squat might be the best movement, or a single leg squat with their foot up on something. Whereas if a guy's trying to grow his quads, The best is probably going to be the pendulum squat, or maybe a quad dominant variant on the belt squat, since it provides spinal traction where all the other ones provide spinal compression. And as a chiropractor, I'm sure you don't like spinal compression terribly, but you probably do think spinal traction is a good idea. So I
Doesn't.
usually program people for having spinal traction belt squats if they have access. And then 4 days later, I'll program them for leg press, and then leave all their spinal stimulation, all their core stimulation for a deadlift variant. Because I feel like rather than loading their shoulders up and crushing their spine, I'd rather have them work their erectors and their core on a deadlift better. Not, of course, having a kyphotic arch to their lumbars, but a lordotic arch to their lumbars with tight abs.
So if I were to say the word squat, well, we'll give it back squat, barbell back squat. Give me the muscles that are being emphasized and dive them with a traditional deadlift.
All right. So if we were going to do barbell back squat, we have to first determine, is it a low bar or high barbell back squat? Then based on how high the bar is on your back, it determines how much your torso has to pitch forward. And based on how much your torso pitches forward, it's how much your hips go back. And then based on how far your hips go back, it also determines how much wider do we have to stand. So we could do a wide stance low bar back squat that's basically almost a good morning, because and that's what powerlifters do. That's why they're able to do 1,000 pounds, is its glutes and adductors are doing most of the work, and then lower back is a limiting factor for a lot of them, but they're also putting a lot of lateral shearing force on their knees. Whereas a traditional bodybuilder would probably wear squat shoes or do heel elevation so that they can drive their knees over their toes and do a high bar barbell back squat and try to turn it into something as close to a front squat as possible, putting most of the emphasis on their quads. Then there's also body type. Arnold had long femurs. Franco had short femurs. Tom Platz had short femurs. So using your classic era bodybuilders as examples, there's a reason why certain people like Arnold had a hard time developing his quads with the antiquated equipment of the 70s, and why his legs would never stand up to a state level competition these days. But people like Tom Platz and Franco, who had advantageous femur lengths for squatting, had great legs, even doing such antiquated techniques such as a barbell back squat. At this point, I feel barbell back squat is good for powerlifters who compete in powerlifting, because it's a sport specific thing like shot put or javelin throwing, and has almost no application for muscle building. The exception of that would be women. If women wanted to grow a bigger butt, then a barbell back squat might make sense, but there's so much other equipment that actually is better for glute specific training that doesn't load the core and the spine. I probably would put that in first to pre-exhaust the glutes before getting to a barbell back squat.
All right. So you take me, and like I said, I want to gain 10 pounds, or at least I want to hold on whatever muscle mass I have for longevity. Back squats, no good. Congenital torticollis. What 2 or 3 exercises would you want me to emphasize to hold muscle or put some muscle on my legs? Middle-aged guy.
This is unpopular, but I would say belt squat or leg press.
Okay.
And that we could play around with it if we had to target a specific muscle. But in the most part, a neutral stance with 25-degree version of the foot, that would probably be enough to get your quads and your glutes equally. You know, there's certain rules for how to do this, is which do we fire first, the glutes or the quads? But for someone who just wants to gain muscle mass to increase their size, if we're just slapping clay on the statue, we're not trying to fine tune exactly where we're putting it because we're not stepping on stage. It doesn't matter. It's whatever's the most comfortable for your ergonomics. That's what I would do.
How about kettlebells? Love them. What do you think about kettlebells for some holding on to muscle mass, longevity, etc., and then for bodybuilding?
I've never used kettlebells. To me, it was a fad that started way after my time. And that, yeah, they've been around for 20, 30 years now, but they're basically pretty much every one of these celebrity trainers in Hollywood. You can look at what they're doing, and that's a guaranteed thing not to do. In fact, Dr. Israel goes through and he goes through all these celebrity workouts where they're doing this wacky shit. It's almost like the celebrity trainer is trying to have something unique so that he can sell the person on him. Like, I've got this unique system. There is nothing unique about this. There is nothing exciting about this. This is working out. It's not funning out. It's the stuff that works for 9 out of the 10 of the Olympia guys are doing the same thing. That's what works. And they're the same boring ass workout for 10 years straight. Once they figure out which is their SFR for that this is how I grow my chest because my chest responds best to this. This is how I grow my quads because my quads respond best to this. That's what you do. And you never have to change it. So kettlebells, they do have some application. Like, I could see if you're doing a lateral raise, then a kettlebell might make more sense than a dumbbell. I could see if you're doing a behind the head press with your palm up, then a kettlebell might make more sense than a dumbbell because the dumbbell won't hit you in the back of the head. But when you say kettlebells, what I think of is when people are swinging stuff under their butts and they're thrusting their hips and they're using their whole body swinging this kettlebell around. And I'm like, that's distributing the force across 7 or 8 different muscles, and you're minimizing the force by using momentum. There's nothing isolating or controlled about that explosive movement. Generally, anything you do for power or sports performance is not ideal for hypertrophy. So for hypertrophy, it's like the polar opposite. You don't want to do something the most efficient way possible. You want to find the way of moving. You don't want to move the weight from A to B in the most efficient way possible. That's powerlifting, that's sports performance. With bodybuilding, you want to find the least efficient way possible to stress a muscle so you can do it with as little work as possible so that you have to eat less food. Because eating food is the biggest limiting factor on all muscle growth, is how much food can you eat. The person with the biggest appetite will always be the biggest bodybuilder. And the training matters for what you look like and where you put the muscle on. But you could be the best in the world at training. If you can't eat a lot, you've got a tiny appetite, you will not grow. And, the same thing goes for like the anabolics. Like, people think that if you take anabolics, you'll grow. Anabolics have very little mass. If you add 1 gram to your body of an oil, that doesn't make you gain more weight than 1 gram. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's eating food that is actually adding calories to your system and allows your body to convert those calories into muscle tissue.
Fascinating stuff. Really good. In reference to longevity, that health span versus lifespan, i.e. vitality, which 3 moves in the gym would you recommend for your clientele for that reason?
Wow, that is a tough one. That is a really tough one. So I'm going to go unconventional and I'm going to probably say Stairmaster.
Okay.
Like, how do these elderly people fall and break their hip? Let's put in perspective. The whole point of your question really is we want to keep elderly people from falling and breaking their hip because when they break their hip, they get pneumonia in the hospital. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, that's clearly vitality. So why don't we take them
Right.
as a segment? We'll take the over 65, 70.
Yeah.
Why don't
All
we
right.
take the active? So I had somebody come in and he said he broke it up into 20 years. It's really funny. He said the first 20 years you're a child, with all due respect. The next 20 years, you're kind of figuring it out. So at between 40 and 60, you're middle-aged. From 60 to 80, you're older. And at 80, you're just really seasoning and figuring it out life. So let's
Yeah.
take it from 40 to 60.
So, everyone who's 40, if they live long enough, will be 60. So the exercises you wished you did when you're 60, you should have been doing when you're 40. So I kind of look at it as like, it's the same. That I know people that are falling upstairs, not just a certain famous guy in his 80s, but I know young people that'll fall upstairs. So being able to walk upstairs without handrails is a pretty useful skill. So I would say that the Stairmaster, although I don't think it's optimal for heart health or knee longevity or for fat loss, although it's very popular, would be more useful for actual functional training. I would think that that's probably one of the most important things you could do to make sure, even if it's 5 minutes, get to the gym. Your 5 minute warm up cardio could be just walking on the stairs, slow, squeezing your muscles for 5 minutes, squeezing your quad, squeezing your glute, activating your whole lower body. Because even if you're training upper body, you're still connected to your lower body. Your lower body is what's supporting your body weight and connecting you to the floor. Even on seated movements, your feet should be rooted to the floor, and they're the source of your power for all movements. I see guys, people sitting in these machines with their feet kicking and stuff while they're lifting, and their body's all squirming and shit. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So you want to have your feet firmly planted on the floor, your core tight, and you're breathing in a pattern before you do anything, even if it's a lateral raise or a bicep curl. So therefore, I think walking on stairs is a useful skill that would probably prevent a lot of hip fractures later in life. Aside from that, I would think knowing how to properly pick something up, basically some type of hip hinge, whether it's a Romanian deadlift or a hex bar deadlift, something that involves picking something up off the floor at a dead stop is a useful skill. And then probably something like a farmer carry, although I'd never do these, I would think that that would be the most useful thing someone can do is pick something up, walk with it, and not drop it, and be able to handle stairs, because that's way more than most elderly people can manage. So if you've been doing that your whole life, you never get out of that habit. We've talked privately about Sly Stallone. I guarantee you that guy can walk upstairs, he can pick something up off the floor, and he can carry something when he walks without getting hurt. And as long as you can do that, that's most of your life. Like, you pretty much can handle anything in real life with those 3 movements.
Those are great. Those were not what I thought you were going to share, but
What do
they're
you think I was
excellent
going to
ones.
say?
Well, I mean, I like the idea of the farmer's carry because that makes sense. Because as you know, I travel every week and I lecture, and I've got to take 2 suitcases, and I sometimes have to move quick, power walk, run, got to carry. You know, for me, my biggest fear is not being able to lift up my luggage and put it overhead. So I see a lot of older people have that trouble, maybe some typically more older women. I mean, there's some people that are vertically challenged that just can't make it, but that's a fear. That I don't have that problem at this point. But boy, if that happened to me and I didn't have a rotator cuff injury on an MRI, I would be disappointed, to say the least. But I love the idea of balance. I think that we forget about balance training, and even in bodybuilding, balance training is critical. You speak about a lot of one-legged moves for isolation, like a one-legged squat, a one-legged deadlift. I think you mentioned that.
Well, I think the one-legged deadlift's dangerous. I do unilateral stuff for everything because I want my arms to match. If I do a barbell curl with my biceps, not only do my elbows not do that, like this is what my arms do. So a barbell curl is retarded for me, but this makes a little bit more sense. This is what's actually what my anatomy wants to do. So I pretty much have to use cables or lean to the side and use a dumbbell, and lean to this side and use a dumbbell. But there's no way I'm going to be able to get a barbell to work. Same thing with your legs. Like, when are you really standing identical left and right? When you do your squats, your hips are always going to be slightly misaligned. And as a chiropractor, I'm sure you know that some people have longer legs than other people. Their hips are rotated. There's several, they could be transversely rotated, they could be tilted. So we have, once a muscle gets to be spasmed and the fascia lines change, it's going to change the kinetic force change, so that if your hips are misaligned, one of the shoulders is going to get blown when you go to the bench press. So I think training unilateral leg movements with unilateral leg press, walking lunges, or at least a Bulgarian split squat, leg extensions one leg at a time, leg curls one at a time, it all makes sense so that your legs can be balanced and we can train them independently. I don't like the one-legged deadlift for the amount of weight that most men would use, but I see lots of women doing one-legged deadlifts with weight that's more like 30, 40 pounds, that doesn't sound too dangerous. But I would hate to see someone doing a one-legged deadlift with 400 or 500 pounds. That sounds really scary. Um, Same thing with like, so yeah, I definitely think the one-legged unilateral way to train makes a lot of sense. Plus, it's less boring rather than doing a set of chest press and then you wait 3 minutes to do another set of chest press and you wait 3 minutes. You could do, not like this chest is a bad example, so I'm going to switch it. So I could do a tricep movement, wait a minute, do this tricep, wait a minute, and it's been 3 minutes for this arm. So that I basically am able to get it done in the same. Unilateral doesn't take longer than bilateral. You just do 1 minute rest between sides rather than 3 minute rest.
What's your feeling on grip strength for performance, bodybuilding, and longevity?
So I've heard that grip strength determines longevity, that if you don't have a good grip strength, you'll die sooner. And I don't have great grip strength because I've always used lifting straps to then allow my lats to do the work and not my biceps. As a consequence, my lats are not that great and my biceps are not that great. Whereas otherwise, if I had never used wrist straps, I probably would have great forearms, decent biceps, and even worse lats. So lats are a much higher yield body part than arms. A lot of people don't realize that about bodybuilding because what they see is they see your face, they see your shoulders and your arms and your chest. And then they think that abs is really important too. Nobody really considers back or legs, even though that's 75% of your body. And because most people don't consider back or legs, it's the rarest thing. So therefore, the person who has really good rare body parts are more likely to win. So having shredded glutes is the most important thing on stage. Having shredded hamstrings is probably number two. Having shredded quads is probably number three. And having a huge back is probably number four. The problem is we're comparing back versus individual leg muscles. Really, the back's made up of like 6 or 7 different muscle groups. But so back or lower body, what's more important? Lower body, then probably back. But either way, if you really focus your training on your back and your lower body, you're more likely to win shows. That means that that's going to help you in any other aspect of life. So the other 364 days a year, the front of your body is what matters from the waist up. But on stage, it's what you have below the waist and what you have on the back of your body that really is what matters. So that's why I use straps. That's why I don't have great grip strength.
Interesting. So chin ups, pull ups, pull downs. What's your choice for functional fitness and then for bodybuilding?
Functional fitness, I would say pull ups. I would say for bodybuilding, the logical thing would be underhanded pull downs or pull ups. So chin ups. I would want a bar to be semi prone or semi supinated, not fully prone or fully supinated, because my body doesn't allow my hands to get in that position comfortably. So if it's an uncomfortable to get in the position for the motion, you're guaranteeing you're going to jack your joints up over time. If you have something that's an ergonomic machine, then it's going to feel better. Like right now, I can feel this rotator cuff is aggravated just putting my hands in here and going this much against no resistance. Whereas if I do this, it's more comfortable. So this is a semi-supinated, and then this is the track of my elbows, because my elbows aren't doing exactly what I want them to do. They're not going straight down. They're not going to hit the lat perfect. And also you, in theory, will get more bicep stimulation sensation wise if your hands are in front of you. So you get to hit lower lats and biceps, which are harder to hit. Whereas if you come out like this, and you'll get more upper back and brachialis, which are theoretically easier to hit. Although there's recent studies that show that you still get more bicep activation out here than you do in here. I don't know if that's entirely true. I think that they've lumped in the brachialis and brachioradialis with the biceps. And what they really mean is you get more arm flexors out here than you do in here, because there's 4 arm flexors. There's only 2 heads of a bicep. And the biceps are arm flexors, but not all arm flexors are biceps. It's like the square and the rectangle. Pull downs are more popular because there's usually only one assisted pull up machine at a gym, and almost no one's strong enough to do a really good pull up. You see guys doing really crappy pull ups, but you don't see anybody doing really good pull ups. But they take the pull up form more seriously with a pull down. The other advantage of the pull down is you can do it one arm at a time. And so that's really popular now, is doing one arm and pull downs. And that's going to allow you to really hit the lower lats better because you can angle your body just right. You can go across the body for greater stretch. You could go up here to get the iliac. You can lean back to get the lumbar, or you can even sit forward more and to get the thoracic portion of the lat, because the lat, although it's got one insertion, it has several different origins, which is really, the lat should be called like it's almost like a tricep muscle, really, because it's got three different origins. But because it's a fan muscle, it's not really like, it doesn't have distinct origins. It's just got the origin fans out from your thoracic spine all the way to your iliac crest. So and the fascia that connects to it really is really what it attaches to. So the lat's a really special muscle that's very hard to hit. So if I had to pick one exercise for bodybuilding, because the pull down's cheating, because all the different attachments turns it into more exercises, then I would say I can replicate a pull up, a chin up, or one arm pull down, all with the pull down. So that's the cheating answer. The real answer is, as you meant, probably is a straight barred, elbowed pull down bar, and only that. Then I would say that a pull up would be better for functional life and probably for bodybuilding. I personally feel more lat activation with the pull up bar than I do with a chin up bar. Although people like Dory H would definitely say the underhand or neutral grip close elbow pull down hits his lats better. But for functional life, definitely this motion, because you have to pull yourself off a ledge. That's what they test you for in the Army and the Marines.
Biceps and triceps. Now,
All
are
right.
they just beach muscles, or do they have a prevalence or a pertinence in functional fitness, or they're good for
I mean,
bodybuilders, and that's the differentiation? You can have an Arnold bicep if you're a bodybuilder.
if reproduction is part of fitness, then I would say arms are very important. But if reproduction is not part of fitness, then I would say that arms are completely useless to train. The exception would be the lockout on powerlifting bench presses. For that, a JM press or board presses would be an accessory thing you would do to build up your medial head of your tricep, so that you can actually and JM presses are this, not or this, and this is the board press, not board press, but whatever, where you put the board here and you push the two dumbbells together and do this to lock out your elbows, to train your elbows to handle a lockout on a bench press. That's the only functional use you're ever going to see that I can think of out of a tricep, is for bench press, locking out in a shirt. So shirted bench division, equipped powerlifting bench press competitions would be the only time your triceps would matter in your life, except for bodybuilding stages or reproduction.
Interesting. Good answer. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk about the hallmarks of aging. So we want to give them a little idea. So my hallmarks of aging are very simply immune reboot, just like my book. I believe that a key hallmark of aging would be to give good immune health and immune resilience, an immune system that is resilient, that's able to be flexible and adaptive, is a critical element to as we age and to increase longevity. Inflammation, we've talked about that. You want to manage and modulate inflammation. There's a term now called inflammaging. Inflammaging means that we can't manage that inflammation, and it causes us to age internally faster. Big hallmark of aging for me is the microbiome. There's three big microbiomes. Number one, your gut. We're made up of 90% bacteria cells in our gut. So if you have a doctor who looks at destroying all the bacteria, he's really being quite myopic, and he has a small lens at your overall health and your overall longevity. Microbiome 2 would be your gums, and microbiome 3 would be your skin. Mitochondrial dysfunction. Interesting in the idea of mitochondria, the powerhouse of your cell. Most people suffer from too much fatigue, which indicates mitochondrial dysfunction. New finding in some of the neurodegenerative diseases is mitochondrial dysfunction. And lastly, the mitochondria also support your innate immune system. So when you're sick and your immune system is compromised, you will be more tired. Fascial injuries, and you and I are going to talk about that in a moment. Fascia, the saran wrap of the body. It's your body's own wetsuit. It holds you together. It allows for tensegrity. It's an intracellular communicator. It actually can promote inflammation. You want to be able to keep your fascia in its pristine condition and allow your fascia to adapt and to repair from injury, insult. And lastly, vagus nerve tone. Cranial nerve number 10 goes from the medulla oblongata all the way down through the transverse colon. It is the key neurogenic feed from the gut to the brain and the brain to the gut. As a matter of fact, it is the secret sauce to the superhighway to health. Now, let's take those. Immune reboot and immune health and resilience. Talk about that with muscle, inflammation, and of course, the microbiome.
Well, a lot of that came at me really fast, honestly. Maybe sneeze. So
Rapid fire, buddy. I gave it to you rapid fire. Talk about it, bodybuilding, muscle, and immunity.
I don't see a huge connection. I think that exercise in general will probably be beneficial for the immune system. That heavy exercise will deplete glutamine supplies, and by having depleted glutamine supplies, our immune system will be compromised. That's why a lot of bodybuilders will supplement with glutamine. Aside from that, I don't know how much there's going to be, off the top of my head at least, I can't see much of a connection. I do know that prostaglandin, I believe it's E2, is an inflammatory mediator that's used for satellite cell migration to muscle cells to donate nucleuses to allow for hypertrophy and eventually hyperplasia. That other things also facilitate that satellite cell migration. But prostaglandin E2 is extremely important. I believe that comes from arachidonic acid or omega-6 fatty acids, but I'm not sure in the diet. But that's pretty much it. That the immune system determines, or at least is a positive stimulator of muscle growth, assuming that mechanical stimulus is there. And that too much exercise can deplete your immune system by means of glutamine. But I don't know a whole lot more than that.
Cool. Inflammation. Now you're lifting a lot. You're breaking your body down. You're elevating your inflammation. How are you going to manage and modulate that to, one, avoid any kind of systemic inflammatory issue, localized, and allow them to recover? Because isn't it you're tearing the muscle apart, causing an inflammatory process and letting it heal and grow back bigger?
That's okay. So that's an older model, which isn't disproven. Although the newest model is that the mechanical tension causes MGF to signal the satellite cells to then, what do you call it, stimulate the satellite cells to migrate to the cell and donate nucleus. Additionally, damaging the muscle can cause inflammation. And it's interleukin 1, 6, 10, and I believe tumor necrosis factor alpha are found. Now, whether it's causation or correlation, I'm not sure. But those markers drive up prostaglandin E2, and prostaglandin E2 also causes the satellite cell to migrate. So in the absence of inflammation, mechanical tension, at least 80% of 1RM, basically an 8 rep range, If you can do it 9 times, it's not heavy enough. It has to be something you fail at 8 reps. You don't have to do all the reps, but it has to be so heavy you can only get 8 reps. That will directly stimulate MGF to migrate and cause the satellite cell to move over. So lower volume, high intensity training can stimulate muscle growth without using inflammation. However, you do get central nervous system fatigue from going heavy. So you're going to get fatigued either way. But yes, inflammation, short acute inflammation is usually induced, is certainly by high volume training. And that is a helpful in that regard. Now, we don't want chronic inflammation, but we want acute inflammation. So for that reason, people avoid vitamin C and omega-3s pre and post training so that they don't inhibit that acute inflammatory process. Whether this is actually functional or if it's just witchcraft, I don't know.
So interesting. And we talked on your podcast about the microbiome's effect.
Mhm.
Fascial injuries, saran wrap of the body. I guess the best way to describe fascia is the peeling away of the chicken skin. The chicken breast is there, and it's that white film. How important is that fascia integrity for bodybuilding?
My understanding is, and the way I like to look at it is, the fascia is like a spider web. And that, you know how like a spider can sit in the center of its web, and when one fly lands in the web, the spider, because of which exact fiber is being pulled on and danced with, it knows exactly where that fly is in the web without even seeing it. And so if I'm going to do one of these things that we don't do in bodybuilding, we do it in powerlifting, we do it in sports, we do it in functional shit. I mean, it's functional training. If I'm going to throw a shock put or something like that, that as soon as I activate my big toe, now my glutes prime to activate. And then my glutes going to activate. And then that's going to line up my waist, and everything's going to work in a sequence. And athletic skill and ability, almost every sport, isn't based on how much muscle you have. It's based on how coordinated can those muscles work in nanoseconds in relation to each other to generate the most amount of force. Like if you miss the beat, you get 50% of the force, and then 50% of the force a nanosecond later, you only got 50% of the force. If you can sequence it just right so that at the same nanosecond, every muscle fires with a maximum muscle tension, you can get explosive force. It's like when you see someone who can't throw a football and just lobs and it just splats on the floor versus they can launch and goes like 100 meters or something like that. They could both have the same amount of muscle mass. It's just one knows how to throw a football and the other one doesn't. Where I'm going with this is that isn't just the central and peripheral nervous system. That's also the fascia. That as you start to contract the muscles, like a spider web, it signals the other muscles in the chain to fire. That the fascia is almost like, another way I look at the fascia is kind of like the trees in the movie Avatar, where it's almost like mysterious and that we don't really know enough about it, but it seems to almost have its own primitive nervous system where the fascia is able to communicate and transmit information. And so that's kind of what a nervous system is at its core element. It may not be electrical, it's mechanical, but it's a mechanical nervous system almost. And it's quite fascinating that, like, if you cut it, it's certainly going to mess up your athletic ability. And then it's going to get glued down and stuck. So a lot of times when people are dehydrated and they get a muscle spasm, the fascia will latch down on top of that muscle fiber to keep it from expanding, because if it expands, it might tear. That the spasm is to protect it against being overstretched and tearing. The fascia glues down to it. Now it's throwing off the whole kinetic chain, And so somewhere else in your body, there's going to be an increased load that it's not prepared for, and that system's going to shut down. And then you're going to get a fascia gluing to the surface of the muscle tissue over there, and then it's going to happen in another place. So, like if, for instance, if my knee hurts and I roll out the bottom of my foot, my knee is going to feel better. Is that because of the muscles, or is that because of the fascia? I don't know. I just know it works.
Fascia is an intracellular communicator, and you're right. It carries a large number of neurons and nerve cells. So with this communication, when you're lifting weights, and certainly lifting weights to the extent that you're suggesting, you're actually going to have an overall body health. It's actually a quite health promoting moment. So lifting weights are great because you're going to put muscle mass. You know, you look better, of course. Muscle mass is the background, again, of longevity. You try to avoid sarcopenia, which we're going to segue into in a moment. Then you've also got the contraction of the fascia, hopefully not the breakdown. And what you said so eloquently was you want to lift, you want to break it down, but you don't want to damage. Now, that being said, where does cardio come in all this?
I wanted to tie this in with something earlier before I move on to something new. You had mentioned that you were concerned about putting something above your head and that you want elderly people to be more competent at doing this. I fully believe that they have the muscle mass for that. But what I think is happening is because of their lower body maladaptations, whether they lose the strength in their hips or they lose the strength in their quads, or they have knee trauma from having low muscle mass, ankle issues, hip issues, lower back issues. All of these things cause bad movement patterns. And that causes the fascia to glue down. And because the fascia is glued down in the lower body, it's going to improperly work the shoulders. So they don't really have an issue with the muscle tissue of the shoulders for putting little things, grabbing a can of soup off of a shelf. What they have is glued down fascia from having immobility of the lower body. And then that's what causes them to tear the supraspinatus tendon when they try to pick things up and set them down. That supraspinatus tendon injuries happen at the hips, usually contralaterally. And I think that's due to fascial lines.
Agreed.
And that's why,
yeah, sorry.
So that's why I prefer the steps and some type of perfectly executed deadlift and a farmer walk so that their lower body never gets bad. And then their shoulders will always be fine.
You're 100% right about the fascia. It's putting it together as a sling. So it's opposite side hip to opposite side shoulder. Fascia is interesting in that it does, without question, detail the idea that the body is all interconnected, and the body's all interconnected in a communication type of fashion. So when you said that one side affected one side on the lower body affected the upper body on the other side, you're 100% correct. I actually thought you were going to start to say that people's core and lower body weren't strong enough, like Andrew Huberman said, gentlemen, do some legs.
I think if their core and lower body were stronger, they wouldn't get hurt and they wouldn't have the fascia glue down. So that's why I said basically with the farmer's walk, it's pretty much a total body, but mostly a leg exercise. The deadlifts, it's a total body, but mostly a legs exercise. And walking on the stair mill is mostly a leg exercise. How often do you see people on the stair mill and they're laying on it? They're like kyphotically hunched over with their arms on it, so using their upper body to reduce the load on their legs, so their legs are doing less work. It's like stand up straight and do less, but do it right. Quality over quantity.
You know, I am without question in your camp because I'm a big believer, again, of muscle mass. I've used that term multiple times in sarcopenia and longevity. Again, muscle mass is the currency for longevity. But there is a direct relationship between the loss of muscle mass, sarcopenia, and memory loss. Sarcopenia occurs due to an imbalance in the secretion of something called myokines from skeletal muscle because of muscle atrophy. Subsequently, the imbalanced secretion of myokines lead to memory impairment by the upregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokine production, which actually goes through the blood-brain barrier or the blood-brain barrier crossing and actually adversely affects memory. So that said, what you're talking about is inherently also talking about being young, youthful, and have longevity to cognition.
Let's go through that one more time. How exactly does muscle tissue
Lack
affect the
of muscle
brain?
tissue.
How does the lack of muscle tissue affect the brain?
Lack of muscle tissue, actually, because of the myokines, those are secreting cytokines, and they seek out and secrete cytokines that go through the blood-brain barrier. They're inflammatory once they get past the blood-brain barrier, causing neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. Hence, if you want to have a strong brain, you want to have some good muscle mass. Or if you will, the bigger your waist, the smaller your brain.
All right, so I'm going to say this a different way in the way I understand things. So as muscle tissue is atrophying or being damaged, then the cell will rupture and leak out IL-1, IL-6, IL-10, tumor necrosis factor alpha. They're lipid soluble. They make it through the blood-brain barrier. Now you have these pro-inflammatory cytokines in the brain, which is going to cause inflammation in the brain. And in theory, otherwise healthy neurons will be destroyed by, I believe they're the astrocytes. Are those the immune mediators in the brain? And that
it's microglial cells that will damage the
microglial cells.
sites, which are the end footing for the blood-brain barrier. So therefore, it loses the support. By the way, this is an exciting conversation. I'm getting stoked. How about you?
Oh, really? Okay, cool. I was like thinking, like, oh, I'm not keeping up with him. I'm just like the dumb meathead on his Smart People podcast.
Dr. Todd Lee, right there.
I know.
IBF pro bodybuilder.
Yeah. So, but it's funny because I was like, I've never heard of that before, and I want to make sure I understand it correctly. So part of how I process things is I see it. It's like I have to see the cell rupture. I have to see the cytokines leak out. I have to see them travel through the bloodstream. I have to see them punch through the blood-brain barrier, that they migrate through the bilipid membrane. Now they're in there. What cell are they damaging? So it's the microglia attack the astrocytes because of the presence of the cytokines. And then the astrocytes are not producing the myelin sheathing then on the neuron axons. And then they start getting catabolized. Okay.
You got it. So basically, these muscle atrophy is spewing out. There's senescent cells and there's zombie cells. So a senescent cell is essentially a cell that's dead but should die, and it doesn't. So they call it a zombie cell, and that zombie cell is spewing out those cytokines: interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, interleukin-8, interleukin-17, TNF alpha. Like you said, they're spewing it out, and they're causing an inflammatory area in wherever it is. It's very interesting. A good analogy is I've had trouble with one tooth, and because I didn't tend to the tooth, it got the gums in the localized area also inflamed, and now I've done damage to them as well. So as my mom said, if you don't fix one part of the car, your car being your body, something else is going to go wrong.
Right.
But one of the best protective sheets that we have, and you're purporting it, is muscle mass and how to attain it in a very, very short period of time at a high level without sustaining any injuries. Every time I go to the gym, because of my musculoskeletal faults, if I'm not excessively careful, if I work with somebody who doesn't understand it, I'm always getting hurt. And you know what? It's at this point, who wants to ache?
Right. So let me back this up a little bit. The zombie cells. Is this why you talk about autophagy so much? That autophagy goes through and eats all the zombie cells. And that's why fasting is important, that if we fast, then we'll eat those zombie cells in the muscle, and then that are leaking out these cytokines that are causing brain damage, so that indirectly, at least through this mechanism, fasting improves brain health.
Yeah, fasting definitely improves brain health. Exactly what you said. Autophagy, self-devouring, eats the cell, breaks it down, uses the debris, and makes new cells, new strong cells. So you can make me muscular. You can give me new cells, right? You can make my cell grow.
Right. but that's the reason for autophagy is the consumption of zombie cells, things that didn't undergo apoptosis, things that didn't
Correct.
self-destruct correctly and implode. Their hull is breached and they're leaking out toxins into the environment, and that you want the body to go through and eat those cells. I never understood the purpose of autophagy. I understand there's words like it's good for you, but when somebody says it's good for you, it's like saying it's God's will or it's genetics. It's basically their way of saying I have no idea, but I want to sound smart. But when I actually can see it happening in the cellular level, when I can see what's happening in my head, now I actually can follow it because everything fits. It's just a puzzle piece. So now you have provided me two extremely valuable puzzle pieces, and that actually creates a very long chain of information.
Well, autophagy, your own way of cleaning, cellular cleaning. So think of autophagy just not as cells. How about immune cells? How about mitophagy? Mitochondria cells getting broken down to new enriched mitochondria. And how about at the gut, breaking down gut cells and having new cells? So all our autophagy or appropriate intermittent fasting is critical for a myriad of conditions, and it's going to be very helpful in a multitude of organ systems and structures.
So now we get to the nutrition part of this conversation. Can I run and grab the bathroom? Can you pause it for us? And then I'll be right back.
Yep.
All right. So we had previously discussed that intermittent fasting, although it's ideal for health, doesn't seem to be ideal for bodybuilding because we have such high caloric requirements. However, I think it was John Meadows who said that he still believes 1 day a week of fasting is critical because although you're losing a day of growing, what you're gaining in autophagy will outweigh what you're losing. And I think that would seem like most people think this is crazy, but the force feeding you have to do to be a bodybuilder is so intense, and it's the worst part of your life, and it's the hardest part of your day, and it's the most time consuming thing, that the idea of not eating for a day and actually feeling hunger again so that you're ready to eat the next day would be such an incredible relief that I feel it's too easy for me to sink into that thing and accepting it as a truth. But then the fear that I have is that I'm losing 14% of my growing period. If I lose 1 day out of 7 days, that's 14%. That's 14% less growth. So if I'm only going to grow 3 pounds of muscle a year, then that means that I'm going to only grow 2.6 pounds of muscle that year. I've lost a 0.4 pounds of muscle a year from doing all of this intermittent fasting. Is that really going to facilitate? And unless it's going to increase the efficiency of the other 6 days, so instead of 2.4 pounds of muscle a year, unless I'm growing at least 3.1 pounds of muscle a year, then I have a net loss, because the hardest thing in life is growing muscle at a certain point. Nothing's harder than growing muscle. And you would sacrifice anything to grow 1 more pound. And that it's totally pathological to a normal person, that people think this is absolutely insane. But if you've sacrificed everything to get this far, and the only thing that's between you and victory, a world champion in something, is 10 pounds of muscle or 15 pounds of muscle, if you have everything else buttoned up, the only thing you're missing is size, then there's nothing you won't do for an extra 2 or 3 pounds. 2 or 3 pounds could be an enormous difference. And then especially if the better you place in shows is how big your audience becomes, and your audience determines your income from how many people you reach and how many clients or customers or patients you get. Then for a bodybuilder, success on stage determines success on life in every aspect of life. And that usually for most of us, the sole thing that determines that is gaining muscle. And the sole limiting factor for gaining muscle is how much you can eat. So to take a whole day off just to grow, just to live a little bit longer, 1 day potentially isn't enough for most people.
Interesting. So I'm going to imbue you with some enthusiasm to want to intermittent fast, time restrictive eating
Okay.
once in a while. Number
Okay.
one, the intermittent fasting does a great job because, as we depicted about the autophagy. Number two, it actually resets your gut with the circadian rhythm. So
Okay.
therefore, when your circadian rhythm is set, health is going to be prevalent. When you
Okay.
add to the fact that the circadian rhythm is also going to allow you to digest, digestion is the key to muscle mass growth, because the one key factor is you guys eat so much, you putting your gut at such a strain because it's always trying to grab all these small digested food particles, vitamins, minerals, and water. If it's not working at its optimum level or optimum functions, you're not going to digest those nutrients. You're not going to grow. So I'll purport to you that a little vacuuming once a week of the gut and the body is going to do the muscle mass some good.
All right. So I'm
Certainly in the
so
off
I
season.
we've discussed previously that I'm on board with the 14 off, 10 on model for daily, intermittent fasting rather than a whole day off of food. And that clearly is great. I love it. I love only eating 10 hours a day rather than eating 12, 14, 16 hours a day. I would much rather eat 10 hours a day. The trick is getting in 4,500 calories in a 10-hour window when it's non-sugar, non-oil, all clean food.
Right.
Keeping a very low fat, high carb
How many
diet.
meals a day do you have to have?
Well, so the science is mTOR stimulation and muscle protein synthesis is optimized at 4-hour feedings. However, there's also research that if you were to have an insulin spike from a carbohydrate feeding in between these 4-hour periods, you shorten the refractory period. So that the smartest way to eat is to have your protein 4 hours apart, but have your carbs in between. This also matches up with growth hormone receptor sensitivity, that the growth hormone receptors basically have a 6-hour refractory period, but an insulin spike in that refractory period resets the growth hormone receptor. So one could theoretically time their protein and growth hormone release, and then they time their carbohydrate insulin release 2 hours later to then maximize this effect. So that in theory, you could get away with as little as 8 meals a day if 4 of them are protein meals and 4 of them are carbohydrate meals.
So every 2 hours. So
So it's every 2 hours. But if you alternate your protein and carbs every 2 hours, you could get 4 feedings in 8 feedings. I think that comes out to 10 hours.
yeah,
You come out
it
to less.
does. It
Yeah,
does.
so you could, that's the only way I can structure a nutrition plan. But I want people to understand that you have to heat the food up, you have to eat the food, you have to clean up after yourself, you have to cook more food. So you're literally sitting there in the kitchen for 8 hours straight, cooking and eating and cleaning and cooking and eating and cleaning and cooking, unless you're going to hire a maid slash chef, or unless you find a traditional woman who wants to support you and be a wife and actually help you achieve world championships. You can make millions of dollars and buy your Gucci and this and all of that, the stuff that most women would like. But most women aren't going to commit to being a chef and a maid. That's something of the past. So you're pretty much alone doing this, or you hire someone to do it for you, or you're just going to have to make your full-time job sitting and eating. And then you have the rest of the 14 hours of the day to lift weights and to sleep and to treat patients. And if you have to sleep 10 hours, now it's 4 hours. And if your workout's 4 hours long, you have zero amount of time for any type of job, for any type of social interaction. You can't pet your dog. You can't walk your dog. You can't, what do you call it, brush your teeth. No amount of time is available for anything else. That's why most of us split up our meals so that there's only 4 or 5 meals. And in between the meals, we squeeze in some type of work. Like, I'm going to sit down on my computer and do blood work for 4 people. I'm going to make, after I finish this meal, I'm going to go walk and get my steps in and do business calls. Or I'm going to go to the gym, and while I'm training at the gym, I'm going to be drinking liquid protein and I'm going to be drinking liquid carbs while I'm lifting weights, so I'm not missing a meal because of my working out. That there's a level of logistics and structure to the day that most people have no concept of, how much harder it is to manage this. And people who've recreationally bodybuilded, they're like, it's not that hard. I had a family, I had 2 kids, I had a full-time job, but they're eating 3,000 calories. They're only eating 3,000 calories. That there's a world of difference between 3,000 calories and 4,000 calories. It's like the difference between picking up 300 pounds and picking up 400 pounds. The amount of percentage of people who can do that, it's not linear. It's not like X amount of people can pick up 100 pounds off the floor. Half that can pick up 200 pounds off the floor. Half that can pick up 300 pounds. Half that can pick up 400 pounds. Half that can pick up 500 pounds. Once you're at like the 300-pound mark, you're at like 1% of the population. Once you're at the 400-pound mark, you're at 1 in 10,000 people. Once you're at the 500-pound mark, you're at 1 in a million people. Like there's an exponentially smaller percentage of people who can lift that much more weight. Same thing with the calories. If without resorting to using junk food, I mean, there's certain ladies who go to the bar and they'll drink margaritas and they'll eat spinach queso dip and they'll knock out 4,000 calories in a night. None of that's turning the muscle. That doesn't count. We're not talking empty calories. We're talking steak, chicken, salmon, beef. I said beef already. Rice, potatoes. Like 4,000 calories worth of, with only getting 50 grams of fat a day. You never want to get excess fat because it'll turn into fat. We want most of our carbohydrates coming from protein and carbohydrates. Most of our calories coming from protein and carbohydrates. So it gets way harder. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's not that hard. I can do it. And they can. And that's why they're 280 with abs. But that the dudes who are 280 with abs are very rare. They're like maybe 1,000 of them in the world, probably.
All right. So data shows that 14 and 10, it just came out like a couple of days ago, is the choice. So before I end, I always like to end with a rapid fire. So
Okay.
you've got to be speedy. Fruits, yes or no?
Wait, what was it?
Fruits. Would you recommend consuming?
Fruits?
Yes or no?
If you're made of money.
Okay.
Well, like they're expensive. And they're like, a lot of the produce is super pesticided, loaded up. So, I mean, if you can afford to spend $5 on 100 calories worth of carbs, when you could get a whole bag of rice for 20 bucks, a 20-pound bag of rice for 20 bucks, it's just a much better deal on the rice than the fruit. Yeah, there's some vitamin C in there, but you could buy a bottle of vitamin C for $5. And people are like, well, natural's better. Yeah, natural's better. But the way that the system is right now, the super nutritious, healthy foods are so expensive, we can't afford them. Normal people can't afford stuff like fruit, not and afford everything else. So you're going to have to cut.
I'm sorry.
Next question.
Carbs over fat.
Always.
What kind of carbs?
Like rice, potatoes is the smartest way to go.
Starchy
And I know,
complex.
yeah, I know you don't really like the starchy carbs. You had told me about the buckwheat, the tartar buckwheat, and
Himalayan
that's
tartary buckwheat.
yeah, and that's flour that you buy and you have to bake it. So depending on how much you're eating, I did some math and I would have to eat, I think 7 or 8 pounds of tartary buckwheat a day. And that's a lot of baking. I would have to buy an extra oven. And I'd have to have baking pans, and the baking pans would need oil. So the amount of oil I'd need to oil the pans to cook the bread would be more than my daily amount of allotted oil possible without actually gaining body fat.
Egg yolks, yes or no? Or
1 or 2 a day.
Whites?
It's not about the ratio to whites. I want to get the K2 and I want to get the cholesterol out of the yolk and the lecithin, I believe, and the choline. That there's a lot of great stuff in a egg yolk. I don't know if you need more than 2 egg yolks.
So you're not worried about the cholesterol.
I want the cholesterol for steroid hormone production in natural people. People not on testosterone would want to get 300 to 500 milligrams a day of cholesterol, not necessarily more. And not necessarily less.
Water. How much water?
I do about 2 to 3 gallons a day. I think the most people, but in order to handle that much water, I need to have about 25 grams of salt a day. That for an athlete who, like, usually our requirements is 10,000 milligrams of sodium, even though the RDA for the average American is 2,000. So most people are inactive. So 2,000, and that's based off of research on people with high blood pressure and kidney disease. That's not based off of research off of bodybuilders, certainly, let alone, yeah. And it's not based off of healthy people, or certainly not bodybuilders.
My favorite drink, coffee.
I don't like caffeine because I feel that although it's a performance enhancer, it negatively affects sleep, and sleep's more importance for growth than high performance. Because remember, my goal and the way I look at the universe is, how do I get better? The way that a business person looks at money is the way I look at muscle tissue.
You were drinking a protein drink. What choice forms of protein would you recommend for your clients?
So it depends on their goals. This is beef, chicken, pea, and rice protein. I don't do dairy because I have a plethora of reasons not to like dairy. Lactose is just one of them. I basically prefer animal meats as a protein source. However, if you were to leucine fortify plant protein sources like rice or pea, then you would have a morally superior protein. But as far as without fortifying vegetable proteins with leucine, to get the best protein source would probably be whey, which is dairy. However, because of the many people have allergies to alpha and beta lactoglobulin, although this is contested, this is my personal experience, is if you drink dairy, you'll get mucus. And they put a little bit of dairy just for texture in here, and there's no way to stop them from doing it. That's why I had to blow my nose 6 times, I think, is whenever I drink this brand. So when I own a supplement company. We're going back online in a year, and no, not in a year, next year, early next year. My intent would be to have a dairy-free protein that was completely dairy-free and would also have enough leucine that it would be competitive with whey, so that one serving of protein powder would be enough to activate mTOR and initiate muscle protein synthesis.
Raw nuts.
Raw nuts. I think that nuts are too high in calories from fat to be worth the effort. That in theory, there's benefits to healthy fats for omega-3s and whatnot, but I think if you'd be more efficient to use straight DHA and EPA, or these pro mediator that you were talking about,
Always
and
mediators.
yeah, I would basically, there's a proper amount of essential fatty acids, and most of the belief that you need fats comes from the idea that you need cholesterol for proper steroid hormone synthesis. But if you're actually doing the 2 egg yolks, you'll get enough cholesterol. If you're using fish oil, you'll get enough omegas, DHEA and EPA, and then some flax will give you some ALA. You can cover your bases without other fat sources.
Lastly, they ask me this all the time, so I know they're going to ask you, what can I have for dessert?
I would say the fruit that you talked about earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's
Sounds good to me.
most of my culture has fruit with every meal, but the fruit is the dessert.
So they're having dessert at every meal. We just let them know that if they're not sure and they're not getting lean enough, fruit is the fat switch. Now, in my era, when I grew up, the guys in the gym that were bodybuilding stayed away from fruit because they said that it made them retain water.
I like to retain water because it helps me to not tear muscles while I'm lifting. There's one time where your water balance matters, and that's when you're on stage. The only reason why someone would say, well, I don't want to do that because it helps me retain water, it's because you're usually not a real bodybuilder. They're a bodybuilder wannabe. So they think the whole world is their stage. A real bodybuilder isn't flashy, he isn't vain. He's like the kid who did wrestling, or he's someone who is in it's just somebody who has usually an introvert with no social skills, is covered up all the time, and is just lifting to perfect his form so that when he takes off the clothes and presents the actual physique that he sculpted, it's perfect. A real
Nice.
sculptor doesn't have people come over and watch them sculpt all year. They finish the sculpture, they stick it in a gallery, and then they sell it. And then they work the next year or 2 years or 5 years on the next sculpture.
So how can everybody get in touch with you? We spend a lot
Um,
of time, good time talking about stuff. It's very clear who and what you are, how extremely knowledgeable you are, expert in your
well, thank
field,
you. Thank you.
highly educated, kind
Appreciate
of
it.
a guy that I want to retain in my armamentarium, in my cadre, if you will. So
Thank
how
you.
can they get in touch with you?
So the easiest thing to do is there'll be a tap link that I'll provide you, and you can put that in the description box, and they can click that, and it's a tree of all my links, whether they want to get a consult with me for medical, coaching or whatnot. Also, it'll have a link to my YouTube channel. My Instagram will be on there. I think I'm on 7 or 8 social media platforms. The keyword is my name, Todd Lee MD. If you search Todd Lee MD, it's gonna bring you wherever you need to find. The only thing that doesn't have Todd Lee MD is the YouTube channel, because the original was banned. Like a lot of doctors were banned for telling the truth, and a certain population didn't want the truth getting out. But this channel is called Anabolic University, Dr. Todd Lee's Anabolic University. So even if you search me on YouTube by name, at the top it'll be my logo, the red dragon with my name in the middle of it. And if you click on that, that'll be the channel. So most of my focus is on YouTube, and then I have my editors, my social media people spread that onto all my other platforms. I tend to be pretty active on Instagram. I usually add to my stories a few times a day, but it's usually just funny memes. So I use like the Instagram as my comedy platform, and the YouTube as being my actual professional content.
Well, if you're interested, and I thought he did a great job, Dr.
Thank you.
Todd Lee.
Appreciate it.
No, it's been my pleasure. I'm Rob Silverman. Always yours in health.